This podcast episode is called American Pravda, and so it seems only appropriate that I should hand out an American Pravda award. Now, this is not an easy thing to do because there's tremendous competition. Lots of people sort of in the running. But I think if I were to give the award now, I'd have to give it to Lester Holt. Lester Holt, the anchor of NBC. Now, interestingly, Lester Holt recently got an award. It was the Edward R. Murrow Award. And while receiving that award, Lester Holt made some very interesting comments about journalism that were then embraced by a lot of his colleagues. The basic theme is that fairness is overrated. Listen.
The unprecedented attacks on the press in this period, I'm sure, will fill plenty of books and be studied in classrooms, maybe even here. But I have a few early observations I'll share about where this moment brings us and what we can learn. Number one is, I think it's become clearer that fairness is overrated. Well, before you run off and tweet that headline, let me explain a bit. The idea that we should always give two sides equal weight and merit does not reflect the world we find ourselves in. That the sun sets in the west is a fact. Any contrary view does not deserve our time or attention.
So evidently, according to Lester Holt, there are in general not two sides to every issue, or perhaps multiple sides to every issue. There is only one side to every issue, or at least to most issues, because in his view, the debates that we're arguing about in America today resemble claims that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But is this an actual correct description of what we're debating in America, what we're fighting about? Now, here I see a video. This is from Democratic Congresswoman Nikema Williams. And she picks up really the Lester Holt theme. She goes, there are no two sides to this issue. You are either on the side of democracy or you're not. So you can see that this rhetoric isn't just in the media. It is also percolating into the larger society. And Nikema Williams, this Democratic Congresswoman, is talking about Georgia. She's talking about the Georgia election integrity law. And she's acting as if there aren't two sides here. There's just one side. Either you love democracy or you don't. Now, I think what is so deeply deceptive about this is that with any restrictions, with any kind of requirements to do anything, there's always a kind of risk on both sides of the coin. So let's look, for example, at the Georgia laws. Let's just take something as simple as voter ID. Now, with voter ID, there is a risk that if you impose any requirements at all, some legitimate voters may be discouraged from voting. Or here's a guy, he's homeless, he's never been able to get an ID, or he changed his name 17 times, he can't get an ID, this guy can't vote. So that's the risk of having ID. This legitimate voter is unable to vote. But there's also a risk on the other side. And that is if you don't have ID, all kinds of illegitimate guys who shouldn't be voting will vote. So the simple fact of it is you have to make a decision here in imposing a requirement. Hey, is imposing this requirement going to do more to protect democracy or to undermine democracy? This is a judgment call. And the idea that there's only one side to the issue, that there's no two sides, this is like the sun rising in the east, Dinesh, reflects a deep ignorance of what our policy debates are all about. Let's think about it. We have a two-party system. We have liberals, we have conservatives, so we have two rival ways of looking at the world that I think are in the end based upon two rival conceptions of human nature. But be that as it may, whether they are or not, the truth of it is these two sides have two completely different destinations that they want the United States to go in. One party wants to raise taxes and believe it will have no impact on productivity or upon the GDP. The other side believes that confiscatory tax rates are very bad. One side wants to expand entitlements in the apparent belief that government spending more and more money, no problem. Doesn't matter what the effect is on the deficit. The other side believes that no, it's better to have smaller government, better to do things at the local level. One side wants to emphasize identity politics. The other side wants to emphasize our common identity as Americans, a multiracial commitment, if you will, to patriotism. So the whole idea that these rival conceptions of the good society, of where America should go, rival conceptions that involve facts, but they also involve values. At the end of the day, an ideology is not a fact, but it's not purely a value. It is combining the two in laying out a kind of policy, a vision for where to go that's laced with policy recommendations of how to get there. So to compare this in some kind of obtuse way with the sun rising and setting, I mean, I don't even know what to say about the level of stupidity, the level of ignorance involved. Now, Lester Holt might say, well, I'm not talking about that, Dinesh. I'm talking about issues where there's real clarity. Well, and even on issues where there's supposed to be real clarity, there really isn't. We ought to listen to the science. Well, the science on COVID is ongoing. There are new findings, new studies. Someone comes up with a new study out of Sweden, another study out of London. This study is criticized by other experts. So the idea that sort of science itself is jumping out of the grave and speaking like an oracle, this reflects a misunderstanding of what science is. It's based on hypothesis, verification, criticism, testing. Or even take something like voter fraud. Dinesh, voter fraud. There's no systematic evidence of voter fraud. That's like the sun rising in the east. Wait a minute. First of all, whether there's systematic evidence or not, this is ongoing. There are cases that are ongoing. Maricopa County just demanded an audit of the votes. There are legal cases that are still pending on this issue, sort of just to claim that something is settled. Maybe there is no systematic evidence of voter fraud, but that doesn't mean that no systematic evidence is forthcoming. To simply shut down the whole discussion, this is like the sun rising in the east. Again, no, it's not. January 6th. We had a riot, we had terrorism, we had an insurrection. Wait a minute, these are loaded words. A riot? I've seen riots, property damage, things on fire, riots, violence, systematic violence going on. It's very debatable whether what we saw on January 6th was a riot. An insurrection? Were those guys milling around, making jokes, taking selfies, playing with Nancy Pelosi's podium? Were they trying to take over the U.S. government? Did they think that they could displace the U.S. military, then tell the military what to do, kind of Pinochet style in Chile? Was it a coup? Were they trying to overthrow the U.S. government? I mean, my point is, at the very least, this is not a settled matter. And so for this Lester Holt guy to sort of put on his kind of Walter Cronkite look and act as if he's, in an oracular way proclaiming the facts are facts and our job is to state the facts, not to give both sides. We have a two-party system because there are two sides. We have progressives and we have conservatives because there are two sides. Now, maybe there are three sides, there are libertarians, but the idea that there's one side, this is one-party state thinking, and it's very pernicious. It reflects the way in which our media has become Pravda-ized. Think about totalitarian societies. They only see one side. And they would listen to Lester Holt and they would go, he's right on. He's doing exactly what we've been doing all along.